Okay, I think we are live. Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. Today we will be doing VARC revision and I hope you are all doing well. So let's discuss RCs first, then we will solve two RCs with 4 questions each, and after that we will start with VA. So first things first, reading comprehension, what is it all about? Let's gloss over a few aspects of reading comprehension. The first thing is there are some aspects that you should keep in mind. That it's not a reading speed test, it's a thinking test, right? Whenever you are reading, you are not really trying to finish reading the passage and get into answering the questions as soon as possible. That's not something that we are trying to do. What we are trying to do is we are trying to comprehend the passage and then answer the questions accordingly, right? We need to answer the questions to the best of our capacity, and it's not really about time as much as it is about comprehension, right? You should understand the author's ideas. You should connect paragraphs meaningfully, right? You should understand how one paragraph leads on to the next, how these paragraphs connect with one another, what one paragraph says and how the other one complements it, right? We should understand how should we draw inferences. Inferences means essentially refers to implications or something that follows from the passage. So based on certain arguments, there are certain inferences that can be drawn, certain implications that lead from them, and that is essentially what we know as inferences. And we should understand how do we draw inferences, what inferences can be drawn and what inferences cannot be drawn, right? Then comes recognizing tone and intent. Intent as in the intention of the author who has written something. How do we recognize the tone and the intent of the author? The core skills that it focuses on, reading comprehension focuses on, are focus, patience, and reasoning. It tries to see whether you can reason based on certain information provided. It tries to see how patient you are in whether if you are provided a sentence that is not as clear to you as you might expect at first, then you can't rush it, right? You have to wait, you have to be patient into understanding for understanding the passage essentially, and you should be focused. So all of these aspects you should be keeping in mind when it comes to reading comprehension, right? I hope that is understood. Let's begin with the next one. Then comes the strategy part. How do we design a strategy for reading comprehension? So firstly, before reading, we need to understand that we should be prepared to indulge. Indulge as in to fully indulge in reading the passage, right? We can't be half indulged, we can't be half focused, and we can't be too focused on answering the question, so focused on answering the question that we forget that we actually need to comprehend what is written in front of us, right? While reading, we should mark the transition words. We all understand what transition words are essentially, right? By now, I hope. So essentially, words like however, but, hence, in contrast. So these words are known as referred to as transition words because they sort of show how we sort of move on from one sentence to the next. And these sort of keywords become very important because they tell us what the author thinks, right? If we are moving, if the author says one thing and then he sort of moves on to the next thing by saying however or but, it essentially shows what the author is trying to emphasize upon, and that actually gives us a good grasp or good a nice key to move further to understand what the author is trying to tell us through the passage, right? Then summarizing is also important. It is not recommended that you waste too much time on summarizing or writing, but it helps to have a mental grasp after each paragraph of what you have just read. So after you have finished reading a paragraph, just sort of introspect on what you just finished reading, right? Then comes after reading. So once you are finished reading the passage, what should you do? The first thing is analyze the main idea before reading questions. Before you get into the question, just analyze the main idea, introspect about the main idea, introspect about what the whole passage was trying to tell you. Then use elimination and reason carefully. Be careful in how you eliminate options, and be careful in how you reason for that elimination. You should have a nice grasp of how to eliminate each of the options and how to answer correctly. And lastly, avoid extreme or absolute options. You can't sort of be too focused on extremity, right? You need to be slightly moderate, slightly balanced in how you approach an answer. So that's about it. I hope there are no doubts. Somebody is asking. Okay, there are no doubts. So for those of you who are ready, we can start with the first passage, I hope. So if you are ready, let's begin. So here comes your first passage, right? Try to read this. You have 8 minutes 21 seconds. I will scroll down the passage, right? Once we have finished. Remember the passage is towards my right, right? This is the passage right here, and these are the questions. Once you are finished reading this part, just write in the chat box and I will scroll down, okay? Okay, I will scroll. I hope you have done reading this. Okay. So for those of you who are done reading the passage, I think we can start with the questions. Or should I give you all of this? So we'll not look at timer anymore. Okay. So if all of you have finished reading this part, let me just go back to the first paragraph. So just type in the chat box if you have done reading all of this. We can go to the first paragraph. I will scroll down once more so that you can revisit all the paragraphs, form a sort of mental grasp of what the passage was about, and then we can start with the questions. Done? Okay, I think that's enough time. Okay, let's revise the whole paragraph. So this was the first part. So just gloss over all of the first paragraph, the whole of the second paragraph, and so on, and we will move further. Okay. Okay, I will give you questions now. The first question is this one. Try to answer this one. Publishes says A. Okay, just save your answers. Someone says B. I want an answer that all of you can agree upon, right? Good answer that all of you can agree upon. Okay, I hope all of you have read this question. For those of you who are still trying to solve it, I would just recommend that you take a screenshot. If you are watching it on a desktop or a laptop, just use your phone, use your phone to take a picture so that I can give you the next question, right? So this was the first one. Okay, somebody has answered D. Okay, great guys. Just keep your answers, save them, and once we are looking at the solutions, we will check them, right? So, okay, Khushi and publish more people are answering D. Let's look at the second one. So the second question is this one. Try to answer this one. Where people haven't started answering this one as well. Okay, enough answers. Let's look at the next one. This is the next question. Okay, many of you have answered this, but I'm not sure if that is correct. Let's look at the last one. I hope that is enough time for you. This is the last question for this passage. Okay, this one I suppose is a fairly easy one, right? All right. Okay, great. Okay, so most of you might have already answered this question. Just note down your answer. We will start with the explanations, right? So let's begin. Formula One is widely regarded as the pinnacle of motorsports, attracting millions of fans worldwide. The origins of Formula One can be traced back to the early days of motorsport racing. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, automobile races were organized primarily to test the capabilities of newly developed vehicles. These races were often held on public roads, attracting both participants and spectators. So, we are talking about the history of Formula One. How did Formula One start? It is widely regarded as the pinnacle of motorsports, as something that is on the top of motorsports. So, whenever we hear motorsports, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Formula One is the first thing that comes to mind. So, Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsports, attracting millions of fans worldwide. It attracts millions of fans worldwide. The origins of Formula One can be traced back to the early days of motorsport racing. So when did Formula One begin? It began with the advent of motorsport racing. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, automobile races were primarily about what? They were primarily about testing automobiles. So newly introduced automobiles, newly introduced vehicles that company recently made and were going to launch. The companies used to test them in these sort of races, right? The capabilities of newly developed vehicles, they were being tested by these races. These races were often held on public roads, They were not held on stadiums, for example. They were held on public roads, attracting both participants and spectators. So everyone came in and joined in, right? Then one of the earliest and most influential motorsport events was the Gordon Bennett Cup. Established in 1900, this international race aimed to promote the development of automobile technology and played a crucial role in shaping the future of motorsports, as it laid the foundation for the concept of national teams competing against each other. So now we are discussing Gordon Bennett Cup, which was the most influential and the most earliest, one of the most influential and one of the most earliest motorsport events. This was established in 1900, the year 1900, the start of the 20th century, right? This international race aimed to promote the development of automobile technology. So again, what was the main aim of these early sports event? They wanted to test new technology. They wanted to test new vehicles. So this international race aimed to promote the development of automobile technology, because the more race there is, the better technology people will try to make, the better technology that companies will try to make, and this will promote the companies to make those technology, right? And played a crucial role in shaping the future of motorsports. So this game, Gordon Bennett Cup, this cup ultimately played a role in shaping the future of motorsports, as it laid the foundation for the concept of national teams competing against each other. Because it laid the foundation of national teams competing against each other. So when did it all start? When did national teams compete against each other first? At least that's what the past implies. It all started with the advent of Gordon Bennett Cup in 1900s. Let's move further. The birth of Formula One can be attributed to the establishment of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile in 1904. The FIA, so this will be abbreviated as FIA, the governing body for motorsports, was formed to regulate and organize international racing events. In 1946, the FIA introduced a set of regulations known as Formula A, aimed to create a standardized framework for racing, including engine capacity limits, weight restrictions, and technical specifications. So now we are talking about birth of Formula One and how it came from, or how it there was some entity that was responsible, and this entity is FIA. I will not really try to pronounce this French name again, but this FIA, which began in 1904, it played an important role in the birth of Formula One. How did it play an important role? Well, what it did is that it tried to regulate and organize international racing event. In 1946, it introduced regulations and rules, right, known as Formula A. So the rules were known as Formula A, aimed to create a standardized framework for racing, including engine capacity limits. So it actually decided on what the limit of the capacity of the engine should be, right? All engines of all the cars that are participating should have a similar sort of framework, right? So that we can actually test the participants who are competing. Weight restrictions and technical specifications. So all of these things were standardized. They were regulated by FIA, and this is how it led to the birth of Formula One. Formula A laid the groundwork for what would later become Formula One. So Formula A, these regulations, they later became Formula One. What would later become Formula One? The inaugural Formula One World Championship took place in 1950. The championship was organized by the FIA and consisted of 7 races held in Europe. This historic event marked the beginning of a new era in motorsports, with Formula One becoming the premier international racing series. So again, this inaugural Formula One World Championship, it took place in 1950. The championship was organized by the FIA, as we just discussed about the FIA, and consisted of 7 total races, and these races were held in different parts of Europe. This historic event marked the beginning of a new era in motorsports. And what was this era? With Formula One becoming the premier international racing series. So how did it mark the new era? Well, we can suppose that it probably marked the new era because there were new rules and regulations that were put in place, and this paved the way for Formula One. Over the years, F1 has evolved and expanded its reach globally. So now we are done reading the history of Formula One. Now we will read about what Formula One is like contemporarily, right? Currently, what is Formula One like? So over the years, F1 has evolved and expanded its reach globally. So Formula One has expanded globally. Everyone knows about it. Everyone follows it. Everyone watches the game. The sport has witnessed technological advancements, rule changes, emergence of legendary drivers such as Juan Manuel Fangio, Ayrton Senna, and Michael Schumacher. Okay, so all of these different drivers, these legendary drivers have emerged, the rules have changed somewhat, and with technological advancements have taken place, right? So there have been a lot of technological advancements. One of the key aspects that sets F1 apart from other motorsports is its emphasis on technological advancements. So, how is F1 different from other motorsports? We know always when we hear the word F1, we think of the fastest cars in the world, right? Competing against, driven by sort of highly talented individuals, highly skilled individuals, competing against each other to get the first position. So one of the key aspects that sets F1 apart from other motorsports is its emphasis on technological advancements. So why is it at the pinnacle? Because it is heavily focused on technological advancements. The sport serves as a testing ground for automotive manufacturers and engineers to develop and refine is the key word, cutting edge technologies. So highly sort of advanced technologies, and they are the F1 focuses on refining these technologies, and it focuses on getting engineers and manufacturers to develop these technologies. From aerodynamics to hybrid power units, F1 has been at the forefront of innovation, driving advancements in the automotive industry as a whole. The constant pursuit of speed and efficiency has led to the development of groundbreaking technologies that eventually find their way into road cars, benefiting consumers worldwide. So we are essentially talking about the cutting edge technology that is employed in F1 that is eventually makes its way to consumers, right? That eventually makes its way to consumers, find their way into road cars, benefiting consumers worldwide. Furthermore, F1's global reach is unparalleled. So there is no other sport quite like F1. The sport has a massive fan base with millions of viewers tuning in to watch races both on television and at the circuits. So what are these circuits? Circuits are tracks, both on television and as an audience in front of those tracks. The popularity of F1 extends beyond the race weekends. It is not just about the weekends when race takes place that people only think about F1 then. No, people also think about F1 when fans discuss with each other, engage in discussions, they engage in debates and analysis throughout the year, and not just when F1 is actually happening. The sport's global appeal is evident in the diverse backgrounds of its drivers, who hail from various countries, adding to the excitement and fostering a sense of national pride among fans. So these sort of audience is from all over the place, right? These are from all over the world. There's diversity involved, and a national pride, a sense of national pride when these people see their fellow citizens competing in these global events, right? Critics argue that F1's environmental impact and high costs make it an unsustainable sport. Now we are criticizing F1, right? Critics, they argue that F1's environmental impact, and we can suppose that this environmental impact should be huge, because these vehicles are at the end of the day, they are driven by people, but they use the fuel, right? Petrol. They essentially use fossil fuels. And if they are so overpowered, then we can also suppose that they must be using a lot of fuel, which means that they are contributing towards carbon emissions. And we can say that the environmental impact should be huge, right? And high cost. The cost should be high as well, because again, we are talking about cutting edge technology. And this is what it makes F1 an unsustainable sport, something that cannot hold for too long in the future. However, now we are looking at a transition word. So something that author is trying to point out, and this will actually tell us what the author's stance is. However, it is important to note that F1 has taken significant steps to address these concerns. So author is trying to support somewhat F1, that F1 has taken many steps to actually make sure that it becomes more sustainable. Its environmental impact is reduced. It is not reliant on fossil fuels as much, right? The introduction of hybrid power units as in mixed power units. They don't just rely on fossil fuels, they also might be relying on hydrogen power or CNG. We are not really sure what these what are the specifications of these hybrid power units, but we can say that this is a move towards the right direction, in the direction of making F1 more sustainable. And the ongoing focus on sustainability demonstrate the sport's commitment to reducing its carbon footprint. So all of these changes that F1 is trying to make, what do they suggest? They suggest that F1 is trying to lower its carbon footprint, and this is the commitment that the sport has. Additionally, efforts to control costs and promote financial stability have been implemented to ensure the long-term viability of the sport. And additionally, there have been some moves taken to ensure that the sport is financially viable, it is financially stable, and so that it can last for a long time. So that is what the passage is all about. We started with the introduction of how Formula 1 began. We discussed how it all started as something to test newly developed vehicles. Then we discussed this Gordon Bennett Cup and the concept of national teams, right? And then we went on to the birth of Formula 1 and the regulations that were generated by FIA and how they were contributed to Formula 1, as well as the naming of the Formula 1, because these rules and regulations, they were referred to as Formula A. And this laid the groundwork for international racing series, 7 races held in Europe, and then over the advances are happening, right? How F1 is different from other motor sports. And lastly, we discussed the environmental impact of F1 and what F1 is doing to understand its long-term viability and address its carbon footprint. So all of this passage, pretty simple passage. Let's move on to answering the questions. The first question asked, the passage suggests that early motorsport races, including the Gordon Bennett Cup, contributed to the formation of Formula 1 in all of the following ways except. So how did these early motorsport races, including the Gordon Bennett Cup, how did these result in the formation of F1? So there might be many ways in which they resulted in the formation of F1 except. So we need to find which of these is not one of those contributors, right? Option A says establishing the concept of national teams in motorsport competitions, laying the foundation for team-based racing in F1. This is true. Gordon Bennett Cup did introduce the concept of national teams. Gordon Bennett Cup introduced the concept of national teams, and this is one of the foundations it laid for F1. So this is not the correct answer. B says encouraging the development of automobile technology by encouraging manufacturers to improve vehicle performance. We can say that this is true because one of the main motivations behind motorsports was testing new vehicles, right? As we discussed in the first paragraph. So this also cannot be said to be true. Introducing a structured competition format that included standardized regulations on vehicle specifications and race conditions. This is true. This is what the FIA had done. FIA had introduced Formula A, it had introduced regulations and so on. So all of this is what led to the start of F1, the birth of F1, right? Remember, we are not just talking about Gordon Bennett Cup, we are talking about early motorsports races and among other stuff. So this is also not the correct answer. Option D says expanding the current commercial viability of motorsport through international sponsorships and broadcasting rights. So this is not something that has been discussed in the passage. We did not really discuss the sponsorships and broadcasting rights part. This is not something that has been discussed in the passage. We can't really say that this is how F1 was born, right? So this is the correct answer. Let's move at the look at the second question. Second question says, which of the following best explains why Formula One has remained relevant despite criticisms? So there has been many criticisms of Formula One, but despite all of that, it is still relevant today. It is still popular today. Why is that? The FIA has strictly maintained the original rules and traditions of the sport since its inception. Well, that might have been the case why F1 stayed so long, but we need to remember that the rules have changed. The passage clearly states that the rules have significantly changed. The sport has witnessed technological advancements, rules changes, and the emergence of legendary drivers. So rules have changed. We can't really say that it has been an orthodox in certain way. The rules have been strict in that they did not really change. So this is incorrect. B says its emphasis on constant technological innovation ensures that the sport evolves with changing times. That is true. The F1 is trying to evolve with changing times, right? It is trying to adopt better financial policies. It is trying to adopt policies which address its carbon footprint and so on. So that is something that can be contributing to F1's relevance. Therefore, it might be the correct answer. C says Formula One's appeal is primarily nostalgic as it has resisted major technological and regulatory changes. Similar to option A, this is also incorrect because the rules have changed. D says increasing interest and global viewership have helped it to remain relevant despite stagnant innovation. So this part is correct. Yes, there has been increasing global viewership. People are becoming more and more aware of the race, and therefore we might say that this is one of the reasons why it is relevant. But we can't really say that the innovation has been stagnant or stopped, right? The innovation has been continuing. It is still going on. So this is incorrect. The correct answer is option B. Let's look at the third question. Based on the passage, which of the following statements can be inferred about Formula One? So there are 4 statements given. One of them is true about Formula One, but the other 3 are not true about Formula One. A lot of you answered this incorrectly. Let's see why. The first Formula One championship featured 7 teams from Europe, each representing their respective countries in competition. Well, that is incorrect. There were 7 races that were held in Europe. We can't really say that there were 7 teams that represented their countries. It is slightly using the keywords and trying to confuse you if you don't really remember what you just read, right? Formula A was introduced to regulate engine capacity, weight restrictions, and technical specifications, which helped balance competition among teams by ensuring fairness. Yes, Formula A, what they did was FIA, they introduced Formula A, they introduced regulations, and this ensured fairness. Right, this is something that is true about Formula One. So this is, but one thing was introduced to regulate engine capacity, weight restriction, and technical specifications, which help balance competition among teams by ensuring fairness. So again, this is true, but this is true about Formula A. This is not really something that can be said about Formula One specifically, right? We need to talk about Formula One. We are not really talking about Formula A. The Gordon Bennett Cup introduced the idea of national teams competing against each other, which later evolved into Formula One, where automobile manufacturers represented their nations. So this is true that Gordon Bennett Cup introduced the idea of national teams, but it is not true that automobile manufacturers represented their nations. This is not something that we discussed. We discussed that there were national teams being involved. We discussed that these manufacturers were trying to perfect their technologies. They were trying to develop new technologies. But can we really say that these automobile manufacturers were representing their nations? That's not really something that has been discussed in the passage. D says, despite its global popularity and technological advancements, Formula One remains an expensive sport with a significant carbon footprint due to its resource-intensive nature. That is true. It has been discussed in the last paragraph. Critics argue that F1's environmental impact and high costs. So high costs means that it is expensive and it has carbon footprint because it is a resource intensive sport, right? So D is something that does not really distort the information provided in the passage, and D is the most suitable answer. Last question says, which of the following best captures the author's perspective on the technological impact of Formula 1? So what is the technological impact of Formula 1? Let's read the options. F1 has revolutionized the automotive industry. That is true, with all road cars now incorporating its advanced technologies. That is not true, right? All road cars, that is an extreme option, right? We need to make sure that there is a balance between practicality and cutting edge technology, right? The cutting edge technology that is employed in Formula 1, that is not really suitable for road cars that are on road, let alone all cars, right? So that is something that is too extreme. We'll eliminate option A. F1's relentless pursuit of speed and efficiency has been the driving force behind all major innovations in the automotive industry. Speed and efficiency has been the driving force behind all major innovations. So again, another extreme options. Again, F1 motivates these companies to try cutting edge technology, to develop new products, right? But we can't really say that all major innovations in this industry happen only because of F1. No, that is not something that can be said. The environmental concerns led to manufacturers introducing hybrid power units in F1 primarily to address environmental concerns. That is something that is discussed in the passage. This is probably the right answer. Let's hold this for now. FIA lead the Formula 1 rules to ensure manufacturers develop automobile technology and test the capability of newly designed vehicles. We can't really say that, right? They developed rules and regulations to actually ensure fairness, to standardize everything, to actually formalize the whole race. It was not really about automobile manufacturers, right? The correct answer remains option C. Let me look at your doubts now. So people are saying, I'm okay. From next time onwards, after finishing each questions, I'll see your answers and I'll see whether you have answered it or not. Okay. I would also suggest that from the next passage onwards, you try to take screenshots. I recommend that you do this session on a desktop, and if you are using a desktop, just make sure that you can take screenshots or take pictures on your phone, right? So +3 Arnav Jha is saying, -1 Arnav. Okay, +3 -1. Okay, just keep your scores with you. At the end of the session, just try to count how many you have gotten. Okay, we'll consider +3 for a correct answer and -1 for an incorrect one and 0 for unattempted questions. So I hope this was clear. I hope we can move on to the next one. Just type in the chat box if you want me to go move on to the next passage. Okay. The next passage is also slightly boring. Okay, don't be bored when it comes to the exam. You'd be eternally grateful for yourself if you are used to reading these boring passages. You should be used to reading these boring passages. Passages should not bore you, right? So that is something that you will find very sort of helpful. I'll post the next question. There you go. This is the next one. From this passage onwards, I would just look at your answers. I have after we are done with discussing each question, so that I am better able to see whether you guys are answering correct or not. And that's about it. That's the end of the paragraph. So I hope you are all reading the passage. I hope you're not really skipping over things and trying to wait for my explanation. Just participate in this, right? Read the passage and try to answer the questions. For those of you who are done reading the passage, the first question is this. You can start solving the first question. Uh, Here's the first paragraph for you to revise everything. Okay, if you guys have your answers ready for the first question, you can type them in the chat box. Then we will begin our discussion of the passage after we are done with all of the questions. Here's the second question. After this passage, we will do verbal ability questions. So I hope you will participate in those questions with enthusiasm because they are much shorter and you can answer them immediately. This is the third question. And lastly, this is the fourth question. Again, we will look at these questions one by one, try to answer them. So, shall I begin the discussion of the passage? Type in the chat box, please, and then we will discuss the passage. Okay, I think that's enough time. Let's begin the discussion of the passage. We might celebrate Olympic medal tallies or share consternation about a decline in GDP, but our engagement remains superficial. What exactly is this sentence telling us? The sentence says that we might celebrate Olympic medal tallies. We might be happy about medal tallies, that okay, we have won so many Olympic medals, or share consternation about a decline in GDP, or we might be concerned about our GDP declining. But at the end of the day, our engagement remains superficial. The way we engage with all of these concerns, all of these matters at hand, is superficial, is slightly shallow. It is not really based in real world things. We are not really making an impact by being concerned about these things, right? Our concerns mean nothing, is what the author is trying to say. At least the way our concerns are currently, they essentially mean nothing. It's only in moments of crisis that we begin to pay attention. So when do we begin to pay true attention? So we begin to pay true attention when the moments of crisis hit, when crisis comes at our door in reality. Our current obsession with all kinds of data related to COVID-19 is a case in point. So the example, one of the example that the author is trying to discuss is our obsession with the data related to COVID-19. So probably the passage was written in the aftermath of COVID-19. So COVID-19 almost ended around about 2022, we can say. So around about 2022, we can say that this is the timeline when the passage is based. So the author is trying to point out COVID-19, the data about the concerns about the data around COVID-19 as a case in point of how we actually become aware of how important data is only in the times of crisis. But even in such moments, we focus largely on the numbers themselves, wondering about their reliability, politicizing them, arguing about their possible manipulation, or making comparisons within and across societies. But even when the author says, but even in the matters of crisis, if the crisis is not really that serious, sometimes what we tend to do is we focus largely on the numbers themselves. We try to talk about how reliable these numbers are. We try to be concerned of the fact whether these numbers are political or not, right? Arguing about their possible manipulation. We argue that if these whether this data is altered, it is whether it is slightly manipulated to suit certain interest, right? We talk about this all of the time, right? Sometimes statistics is skewed to derive a certain result or a conclusion, or making comparisons within and across societies. So even making comparisons across societies, we use data all the time. But even in such moments, we focus largely on this. So the author says that we focus largely on comparison, we focus largely on debating about reliability, debating about politicization of data, all of this. Implicit in these actions is the assumption that there exists a neutral, untainted truth that these numbers can accurately and unequivocally capture. So whenever we are talking about data in terms of how it can be manipulated, in terms of how it can be manipulated to suit certain interests, to give certain conclusions, what essentially are we assuming? The author says that we are assuming that there is some aspect of data that is independent of all of this. We end up assuming that this data in some way is independent of everything and is representative of a factual or objective truth. There is no subjectivity to it. But the author is essentially trying to argue that what if there is no objective truth? What if all data is some sort of instrument that all kinds of different sort of people use to suit the conclusions that they want to show, right? This is, of course, patently false. The author says this is patently false. This is sort of verifiably false, that this is not, that data cannot, that data is objective. The author essentially is trying to say that data can be subjective. Data most of the time is subjective, is what the author is trying to say. Statistics are neutral only if we accept that how we come to know something has no bearing on what we know, and of course vice versa. The way we assume the data is objective, that it is independent of what the sort of writer of data or somebody who collects data, what that person might be thinking about that data. It is independent of that person's perspectives or subjective nature, or all that data is something that is objective, and there is no subjectivity to it. The author essentially talks about that how we come to know about something has no bearing on what we know. These people who argue that data is political, that data is manipulated, their inherent assumption is that data sort of carries a certain unequivocal truth, some certain objective truth. So the author says that people argue about data manipulation and politicization. They are assuming that data is objective. Data can only be objective if the instruments that collect data do not reflect bias. But the author is arguing that how we come to know something has no bearing on what we know, right? When we try to derive data, we try to derive conclusions, and whoever is deriving conclusion is a person, and all people have biases. That is the essential nature of data that author is trying to portray. Author is essentially trying to say that there is no objectivity to data. Data can be as varied in meaning and as diverse in meaning as people make it out to be, right? Let's move on to the next one. The 1950s were a witness to arguably the most vigorous disagreement over this question of what and how. So this question of subjectivity of data, 1950s were witness. In 1950s there was a lot of argument about all of this. As the world emerged from the devastation of the Second World War and entered a period of decolonization and imperial collapse, countries both old and new reposed great faith in the authority of quantitative methods and statistics. So author is trying to say that after the aftermath of Second World War, the decolonization was happening. There were old countries and there were new countries being formed, and all of these countries were relying on data to help them move forward, right? Collecting and analyzing data using advanced statistical methods came to define modern governance. So this is why statistics became important, data became important, and this is why data led to the foundations of modern governance. That is how statistical methods came to define modern governance. This shared faith, what shared faith? The shared faith in data, the shared faith that data can help people design new systems, that data can help people design or govern people, right? Govern everything. So this shared faith, this shared belief in the objectivity of data, however, didn't always translate into shared methods, right? It doesn't really mean that the methods that people were using to collect data and analyze data, it doesn't really mean that those methods were the same. Those methods could have been very different from each other. refracted through an increasingly thick Cold War lens, the universal desire for ever-increasing quantitative control is splintered, taking forms that not only varied significantly but were seen as each other's correctives. So, after the Cold War, right, there was an universal desire for ever-increasing quantitative control. Right, people wanted to control everything quantitatively. They wanted to use data to control finances. They wanted to use data to control people and manage people. But what happened was that these people started defining their own methods. So some methods were being used by this set of people, other methods were being used by this set of people, and that it turns out that both of them were using the same data. Both of them were assuming that data is objective, that data carries certain truth, but their methods were vastly different, and in fact their methods were supposed to be corrective of each other, as something that is better than the other one, right? In October 1949, Mao Zedong and the communists declared victory over Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist government. So Chiang Kai-shek, he is probably a nationalist, the leader of the nationalist government in China. In October 1949, Mao Zedong with his communists and the communists, they declared victory over them. They defeated the nationalists. So communists defeated the nationalists, putting an end to nearly 4 decades or 40 years of chaos, punctuated by rebellion, warlord rule, a Japanese invasion, and finally a bloody civil war. So all of this happened under whose rule? All of this happened under nationalists' rule, and all of this was ended once these communists came into power. Once these communists declared victory over Chiang Kai-shek. Buoyed by their victory, buoyed as in buoyancy, we all know what buoyancy is, right? It is floating, something that floats. So buoyed by their victory, as in floating or happy or excited by their victory, and confident of the transcendence of Marxism-Leninism, and they were very confident that their sort of philosophy of Marxism and Leninism, it transcended everything, as in it sort of represented a truth, or it represented a system of policies or a system of governance that transcended almost everything, that was better than almost everything. The communists set about transforming China, and therefore all of this in hand, with their victory, with the confidence, and with their philosophy, they set about transforming China. They started transforming China. Few, if any, were ever more optimistic, right? They were very optimistic, and as opposed to they have ever been. But the great promises of improvement also helped rationalize repressive and violent measures. But these great philosophies that they had, this huge promises that they had for people and for themselves of revolutionizing the country, of revolutionizing China, what it led to is that it led to a rationalization or a justification of violent measures. They started using violence to actually sort of execute their policies, to actually make their policies a reality. They started using violent measures to sort of get a workaround on imposing all of these policies, leaving behind scars, both physical and psychological. And all of these violent measures, they left scars, both physical and psychological scars, and we can also argue economical scars. Powerful and progressive reforms, such as the redistribution of land to peasants and the enactment of a new egalitarian marriage law, coexisted with the need to discipline and subdue different sections of society, from bureaucrats to merchants to intellectuals. So there had been a lot of reforms that these communist people did, and that Mao Zedong's government did. What kind of reforms? Powerful and progressive reforms. They were progressive in that they were trying to transcend everything, and they were powerful in that they were overpowering, in that they were violent, such as the redistribution of land to peasants. They focused on redistributing the land to peasants. Enactment of a new egalitarian marriage law. This coexisted with the need to discipline and subdue different sections of society. And there was these communist people, they also felt like they needed to discipline new sections of society, from bureaucrats to merchants to intellectuals, right? The final campaign of the decade brought the story full circle, and the final campaign brought the story full circle. Which story are we talking about? The story started when these communists defeated nationalists. Chiang Kai, what was the name? Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalist government. When this government was defeated, and after all of these reforms have taken place, after all these violent measures, the story comes full circle. How does it come full circle? We started where we began. Why? Because a terrible famine devastated the same peasants that had so spectacularly been empowered 10 years earlier. So 10 years earlier, when the communist government first came to power, these peasants felt that they were empowered because there was a redistribution of land happening, and all of that was happening. So these peasants felt that they were being empowered, they were being supported by the government. But now the story comes full circle, and 10 years later we have a famine. Across this vivid canvas, the story of statistics, subject to benign neglect at the best of times, ought not to occupy pride of place, and yet it lies at the heart of China's socialist experiment in the 1950s. So after all of this data, you will see that statistics is not something that would seem so benign, right? You would think that, okay, statistics would help us improve, it would help us design better policies, and it doesn't really matter how we exert those policies, we can take violent measures and so on. So after all of this, you will realize that statistics is not so good, it is not so benign, because it actually had forced these communist people to put in violent measures. It forced them to put in violent measures. So it would, after all this, you would think that statistics is not that good, but yet still it lies at the heart of China's socialist experiment in the 1950s, and still it lies at the heart of China's socialist experiment. All of these reforms, we are calling it a socialist experiment, and statistics essentially lies at the heart of it, at the core of it. A new kind of statistics China did indeed fashion. Now we are talking about a new kind of statistics that China actually devised, that China started. And it offered emphatic answers to the interwoven and essential questions of what and how. And it offered emphatic answers to the same old questions of what and how. Rejecting the nationalist and globally dominant understanding of statistics as a universal science, Chinese statisticians joined their Soviet compatriots in redefining statistics as a social science. Okay, so now we are talking about how these nationalist understanding of statistics as a universal science. So remember, the communists defeated the nationalists. These nationalists used to think that statistics is a universal science, it applies everywhere. But unlike them, the new ones, the Chinese communists, just like their Soviet counterparts, these Soviet compatriots or counterparts, Soviet people were also doing this socialist experiment, and the Chinese people are also started doing this socialist experiment after they defeated the nationalists, the Chiang Kai-shek, right? So after they defeated all of them, they also tried to see statistics as something that is different. How? They started to redefine the statistics as a social science, not as a universal science, right? Its true object was the social world. So what was this all about? The statistics, it was about the social world. How? Why? Can you think of some motive, some motivation behind why these communists, the new communists, Mao Zedong and his communists, why did they start thinking of statistics as a social science? Well, the reason is simple: because they wanted to control the populace, because they wanted to use violent measures to exert their policies. So it becomes natural that they would have thought of statistics as a social science. Eschewed outright were the physical and natural worlds, right? They actually essentially declared that physical and natural worlds, they were not related at all to statistics. These latter areas, which latter areas? These ones, physical and natural worlds, became the subject of mathematical statistics. So they separated statistics from mathematical statistics. They said that this natural world, this physical world, mathematics and science, all of them are piled up together and they form the realm of mathematical statistics. The normal statistics, which does not involve any mathematics, it is actually part of the social realm. It is actually part of the social world. These latter areas became the subject of mathematical statistics, whose correct place was in the departments of mathematics, physics, engineering, and so on. So these new mathematical statistics, it became a part of engineering, it became a part of department of maths and so on. It did not really have a place in the social realm. Okay, so that was all what the passage was about. We started discussing how statistics came to be, how it became so important in governance. Then we discussed the Chinese case, the case of China, how statistics played a huge role, how it went from being benign to being necessary. And lastly, we discussed the binary of mathematical statistics versus the normal social statistics, as Chinese communists would call it. Right? Let's begin answering the questions. The first question asks, which of the following, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? So what was the central idea of the passage? There are key ideas, many key ideas. The main of them was that statistics is something that varies. It has led to governance and so on. But let's try to see which of them goes against the main ideas that are presented in the passage. There is no one main idea, but there are many different main points that lead up to the whole story of the passage. Option A says a fair share of Chinese statisticians still believed in statistics' universal nature and continued using it that way. Yeah, so there can be many Chinese statisticians who did not really believe that statistics was a social science, but we don't really care about them. This might be 2 people or 3 people, right? It doesn't really mean that the whole idea of the passage is sort of proved wrong, right? So this is option A is incorrect. Let me check if you have answered it or tried to answer it. Okay. Option B says several statistical measures like the percentage of the population below the poverty line are objective and untainted by political ideologies. Now this is something that goes against the passage. The passage clearly says that statistics is always subjective. It depends on who is gathering the data, it depends on who is using that data to sort of their own sort of incentives, right? They might be trying to push a policy in or something like that. So this is something that actually goes against the passage because it portrays statistics as objective, whereas the passage is very clear that statistics is not objective, right? So this can be our answer. C says Mao Zedong's communist government redefined several economic indicators to promote the communist political ideology. Redefining the economic indicators to promote this communist political ideology, we can say that yes, they did that. They used their communist ideology to redefine statistics as a social science as compared to a universal science. That was the belief of these nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists. So we can't really say that this undermines or that it goes against the passage. It actually follows from the passage. This is also incorrect. D says immediately after the Second World War, only a few powerful countries recognized statistics as a social science. We can say that it is true because we know for sure that China, with its communist government, and Russia or the Soviet Union with its Soviet powers, right? They both considered statistics as a social science. So at least 2 countries were there. So there were some countries who saw statistics as social science. So this is also correct and does not really undermine the ideas presented in the passage. The only option which goes against the passage is option B, and therefore B is the correct answer. Let's look at option 2, question 2. Question 2 says, the author does which of the following by striking up a conversation about China in the 3rd and 4th paragraph? So why is the author talking about China? Well, we can assume we can sort of guess why the author is trying to talk about China. or mentions China? Because he first begins the discussion by saying that statistics is not a neutral science, right? And then he gives us the example of China. And he then discusses that China actually considered statistics to be a social science, whereas others might have considered it to be a universal science. So he was probably giving China as an example of how there are different ways of looking at statistics. Let's try to answer the question. A says he comes to the main argument of the passage after providing the relevant information to set the context. Is he trying to set the context? No, he had already set the context in the first paragraph. He already discussed much of it. Right? China was only an example. So this is incorrect. He uses China as an illustrative example to bolster his claim about ideological differences in the preceding paragraph. So yes, there were ideological differences in the ways statistics was perceived, and China was an example of that. So this is probably the correct answer. Let's look at C. He conveys how a difference in ideologies was a major factor in a nation choosing its perspective towards ideas. Just one nation choosing its perspective towards ideas. Difference in ideologies was a major factor. No. Did Chinese communists choose statistics to be a social science because there were ideological differences, because they wanted to set themselves apart from nationalists? No, we can't really say that. Maybe they already believed that statistics is a social science. Maybe they came to learn after many years of governing people that statistics is should be better thought of as a social science. Maybe it had nothing to do with them trying to set themselves apart from nationalists, right? We can't really say that. He criticizes the Chinese communists for zealously following their ideology, largely disregarding statistics. Did the Chinese disregard statistics? Would the author say that Chinese should not disregard statistics? The author would not say that, because the author himself says that statistics means nothing. As statistics would only mean something when it is used by someone. So that someone will define what statistics is. So the author would not really go ahead and say that why are you not using statistics? Because he would only say it if he truly believed that statistics represented the truth. But he does not really believe that statistics can represent an objective truth. So this is also incorrect. Option B is the correct answer. Let's look at the next one. Which of the following is true in the context of the last paragraph of the passage? So what does the last paragraph talk about? The last paragraph talks about how Chinese redefined statistics as a social science. It also talks about how mathematical statistics became sort of came under the ambit of physical and natural worlds. It came under departments of mathematics, physics, and engineering, while the other statistics, it became a social science. So the universally prevalent understanding of statistics could not answer the questions about what and how of statistics. It's not really about that. The author is saying that so universally prevalent understanding. First of all, there is no universally prevalent understanding according to the author. Author makes it very clear that there is no universally prevalent understanding. Some people believe in one thing while the others believe in other. So he can't really talk about sort of supporting it or going against it because there is none. Right? He's very clear about this. So this actually goes against the passage. The author explains how the mathematicians found their place in policymaking, growing from the limited space in academia. No, it's not really about that. The author has not mentioned anywhere in the passage that mathematicians, after all of this, after 1950s, after the famine and everything, after there was some improvement in Chinese communist ideologies and so on, the author really doesn't talk that whether it has ever happened that mathematicians became the policymakers. All he says is that this mathematical statistics became a part of this natural and physical science, right? Became a part of science, while the normal statistics became a part of social science. The author condemns the Chinese governments, again condemns. The author is nowhere condemning the Chinese government. It is just portraying how there were differences in the ways statistics was perceived. So there was no there's no instance of condemnation by the author of the statistic, the Chinese perception around the statistics, right? This is also incorrect. The Chinese statisticians believed that the social world did not complement the tools of mathematical statistics. Exactly. So the social world was different for mathematical statistics. Mathematical statistics did not really belong in the social world for them. It belonged in the department of mathematics, right? And it's the normal statistics that belong in the social world. So this is actually the correct answer. Let's look at the last one. The author of the passage is likely to agree with which of the following statements? So there are 4 statements given. We need to find which of these would the author agree with. A says, we disregard the resources of the statistical data and jump to the implications of the result, politicizing and arguing about them. Yes, we tend to do that, but do we always do that? Are we never really rational? Are we never really using data? No, it's not something that the author would agree with in general, right? Author says that we tend to do this, but we don't always do this, right? He says we might celebrate, we might be doing that, but despite that, statistics is it cannot be neutral. Statistics is tainted in colors of subjectivity. Statistics has different variations. It depends on who you ask what they will answer, right? So we can't really say that he will disregard the sources of statistical data and jump to the implications of the results. He will criticize us, or he will agree with the fact that we politicize and argue about them. No, he says because according to him, politicization and argument is the soul of statistics. It is not really something that the author would criticize. He just says that despite all of this, the assumption underlying all of this is that statistics must be carrying an objective truth, but there is no objective truth, right? So this is slightly sort of trying to deviate you towards what the author would agree with and not agree with, right? The warlords rebelled against the nationalist government of China but lost their free reign under the subsequent communist government. No, there were warlords under the nationalist government, and there were rebellions happening under the nationalist government. But we can't really say that these warlords rebelled against the nationalist government. This is not something that has been mentioned in the passage. No statistical report, no matter how unbiased, can reflect the absolute truth. This is something that the author would agree with, because author is very clear with the fact that statistics is tainted with colors. It is not objective. There is no absolute truth. So this should be the correct answer. D says the different statistical approaches used by the nations after the Second World War helped each other in correcting their methodological errors. So yes, there were different statistical approaches that were used by the nations after the Second World War. But can we say that they help each other in correcting their methodological errors? We can't really say that, right? It's not something that that is mentioned. The only thing that is mentioned is that they are using different methods as corrective to each other's methods, but they are not really trying to correct each other intentionally for the welfare of each other. That is not what they are trying to do. The correct answer remains option C. So that was the passage. I hope you enjoyed the passage. As you see, it is already 9:32. The time is already over. I will try to post the questions, the 4 parajumbles, the 4 VA questions that we were going to do in this session. I'll post them in the IIMB UG WhatsApp group. You can check these questions there. We will end the discussion for today here. Okay. I really hope that we could discuss the VA questions as well. But if you have any doubts, you can post them in the WhatsApp group. Okay. And I will try my best to answer them. So thanks for watching. Best of luck for the exams. Join us for tomorrow's session as well. And that's it for today. Good night.